also like to welcome everyone to tonight's event. My name is Rich Dubin. I've been in medical publishing for over 30 years. I founded the evidence-based clinical publication Lower Extremity Review in 2009. I'm also the father of 4 and have been involved in every aspect of youth sports for over 20 years. I actually have a daughter going off to play basketball in college, although we still don't know if there's going to be a season or not. I've seen it all, and I've learned a lot about parenting, communication, coaching, safety, and so much more. Last year, I launched MVP Parent Magazine to educate the parents of youth athletes about performance, injury prevention, safety, nutrition, sports psychology, and more. Now we're in some trying times. All of us know that COVID-19 has affected our families and the lives of our youth athletes in a big way. And when it comes to youth sports, the landscape continues to change hourly. So we must stay informed and remain vigilant. I'm so honored and excited to be selected to moderate this educational series. We brought together these esteemed panelists to provide some clarity and give us the information we need to help navigate these times and determine what's best for our athletes and our families. During the first session on Tuesday night, we discussed the benefits and risks of sports participation during this time. And last night, we addressed all aspects of safety. Both sessions were extremely compelling. All the panelists shared some great information, and we learned that there's really no right or wrong answer, but certainly there are many things that we need to be mindful of as parents to help make us informed decisions about staying safe and participating in sports. As a parent of a 13-year-old daughter involved in sports, I learned so much from the first 2 sessions. And with a second daughter headed to college this fall to play basketball, tonight's session is of high interest as well. Any parent with a child planning on playing sports at the collegiate level needs to pay great attention to tonight's event. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items that I want to go over. Attendees, we will have a Q&A period at the end of tonight's session as time allows. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions for the panel, and we'll address as many as we can. All 3 discussions will be recorded and available later in the week. We encourage attendees to download and share the resources and information shared during this educational series and discuss what you learn with your family so that your athlete can play informed. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists. Dr. Drew Watson is a board-certified pediatrician and sports medicine physician at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health in the departments of orthopedics and rehabilitation. He is a team physician for the University of Wisconsin Division of Intercollegiate Athletics and the head team physician for Forward Madison Football Club in the United Soccer League, League One. Dr. Watson also serves as the chief medical advisor for the Elite Clubs National League. Dr. Stephanie Chu is an associate professor of primary care sports medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, the incoming vice chair for the NCAA Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspect of Sport, and a member of the NCAA COVID-19 Advisory Panel. Murphy Grant is a certified athletic trainer and the Senior Associate Athletic Director and Healthcare Administrator for Wake Forest University Athletics. Grant is also the chair of the National Athletic Trainers Association Intercollegiate Council for Sports Medicine. Wow, that's awesome. This is a really important topic with a lot to discuss, so let's just jump right in. If you've attended our other sessions, you've heard this question, but it's important that everyone understands what COVID-19 is and the risks associated with it. So Dr. Watson, what do we know and what are we still learning about COVID-19, especially for those athletes who are around 16 to 18 years of age?
Thanks, Rich. First, let me say it's really an honor to be asked to participate in this discussion. I am a pediatrician and I am a sports medicine physician, but I'm also a father, and I've been a soccer coach for far longer than I've been any of those other things. So I've sort of been living this from all sides. And if I can potentially add a little information that helps people navigate this, well, it's really just an opportunity I'm very appreciative of. So by way of background, I mean, we all really know at this point that COVID-19 is a disease that gets caused by the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. This has been spreading rapidly throughout the world since the end of last year, to the extent that we now have over 20 million worldwide cases, 5 million cases in the US, including over 400,000 children. The range of disease severity is really very broad. A lot of people will contract this virus and not ever develop symptoms, while others will have severe symptoms and can even die from the disease. Thankfully, children seem to be less severely affected than adults. Last week, the AAP reported that children represent about 9% of the cases within the US, but less than 2% of the hospitalizations and less than 0.1% of the deaths. So while they may be a little bit less susceptible than adults to severe manifestations of the disease, they can certainly acquire it. And I think suggesting that they're not susceptible is simply untrue. They may be less likely to have significant negative outcomes, but children that have underlying medical conditions like immune deficiencies, metabolic disease like diabetes, underlying cardiac or pulmonary disorders can all be at increased risk of developing severe symptoms. And children can also transmit the disease to others who may be at greater risk. So early in the pandemic, it appeared that children were generally not identified as the sources of outbreaks, but more recent evidence suggests that they can be the index case within their household. They can pass it along to other household members, and that they may carry similar viral loads to adults. But I think the real question within youth sports is how readily can children transmit the disease to each other within different sport contexts, potentially connecting networks of at-risk adults who might otherwise not be exposed or infected with the virus. And how likely are they to do that when we institute risk mitigation procedures like symptom monitoring, social distancing, mask use, hygiene, disinfection? And I think we really don't know what the transmission rate is within certain sports for kids with that respect. And unfortunately, with adolescents, we really don't have a lot of specific information with them either. We tend to think of children as a group with the evidence that's been reported so far. And it's not really clear whether that means that our children as a large group represent adolescent risk of transmission or risk of severe symptoms, or whether they represent a unique population. I think this is one of the biggest difficulties in trying to make these decisions about youth sports, is that we're trying to navigate competing risks with often incomplete evidence. And so as often happens when I'm talking about COVID-19, I feel like sometimes I end up with more answers than questions, but my hope is that at least that provides maybe a little bit of background and perhaps an initial framework for the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much for that explanation. Look at what's happening right now in the news in the past few days on the college front. There's a lot of conflicting messages, and I know parents are very confused. How does what's happening in collegiate sports impact youth sports? Dr. Chu?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to thank you for inviting me for this. I've been a team physician at the University of Colorado since 2008, and up until a few years ago when I had my own children, all of the kids that came to college, I became kind of their doctor away from home, and so it's a pleasure to be able to speak with this audience, because the athletes that I worked with that I have been working with over the last 12 years have been very special to me. I think with the cancellation of fall sports over the past couple of days and a couple of very large conferences, there have been a lot of whys. And why did those conferences cancel versus some of the other conferences are still moving forward? I can speak with the conference that I work closely with, and that's the Pac-12. And similar to what Dr. Watson said, there is a lot of uncertainty. And the NCAA put together recommendations for the divisions and for sport to move forward. And a lot of those recommendations required some very regular testing for high-risk sports. And those high-risk sports are those that can contain contact. So the things such as football and soccer and basketball, where there is a lot of physical contact. We just don't know the transmission rate, as Dr. Watson had said, when our athletes are playing those sports. And in order to mitigate that, we would need to test on a very regular basis. We kind of looked at that and looked at the different schools within our conference and kind of looked at the prevalence of the virus. And the prevalence in half of the schools in the Pac-12 were at a level that was quite high, which would require every day testing or every other day testing for many of those schools. and to look at that and look at community spread and have to say, well, we're going to put our student athletes at risk in addition to the community spread that's already happening in those communities on a sports field where we don't know what the risk is because we haven't played in that way. And so without masking and social distancing and things of that nature. And so I think looking at that coupled with some of the cardiac risks that have come out on the news recently, it just became too risky to move forward at this time. And so I think looking at all of those factors into play, the thought is to postpone. And the thought is to continue with, on a lot of our campuses, what they have been doing over the summer, and that is working out in small groups, working out social distanced, working out with masks on, where we can mitigate a lot of those risks until we see that the prevalence in the community has gone down, and we're able to track and test in a more timely manner.
Very good. Murphy, you'd like to weigh in on
Yeah,
that?
I agree with her, and I'm in. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak again with the other two individuals that's on this panel. It'll be a challenge to keep up for sure. But I'm in a conference that we are still moving forward. We are evaluating each and every day on what our status is moving forward in the ACC. And we have had one of our physicians who headed up our medical advisory group, and as a conference, we feel that sport can be played safely. We are looking at those exact things, on the increased testing, but it has to be a conference-wide thing. One or two institutions can't just be the ones that can do it as frequent as everyone is wanting. If we're going to do it, we would need to do this as a league. And those were a lot of the conversations that we've had. When it comes to the myocarditis and some of the cardiac issues that we've come up, we've had many, many conversations about that. And I know that everyone around the country, we're all talking, we're all having the conversations about the right things to do and how we're going about doing it and what you're reading and what research is out there. We're all healthcare professionals. We're all do the same thing, just the geography and where we are doing it is certainly different, but the health of the student athlete, the health of the athlete is always our number one priority from a healthcare standpoint.
Absolutely. So all that's going on and all we're discussing, how does that impact youth sports? Like, how do we see that affecting, or how do you expect it will affect youth sports? How do you anticipate that? Dr. Chu?
Yeah, I think on some level it kind of remains to be seen, but I do think that they're different contexts, and I don't necessarily think that everything we apply in college necessarily translates directly to youth sports. I mean, there are different numbers of people in attendance. There's a lot of different logistics that go into the sort of monitoring and testing that you may be able to do within the resources available of different organizations. And I think there's also widely variable amounts of risk within different sports. I think it's very hard to just sort of blanket all organized sports with the same sort of expectations of risk when you think that because of the way athletes interact and in the environment they compete in, they may have very different levels of risk transmission. So I think youth sports still remain kind of a unique context that should be approached on its own. And even within that, I think we have to consider the potential for risk transmission within specific sports individually. I think we see very different amounts of risk in activities where you can physically distance children, or you can use masks within certain scenarios, or the interaction between them in close proximity is very small. So I think it kind of remains to be seen what optically happens in terms of the perception of youth sports going forward in the wake of college cancellations, but I think they should be considered differently.
And I think the point has to be made that we don't really know, right? We are continuing to learn as time goes on. So we have to look at this, looking forward, where 3 months, 6 months a year from now, then we can look back and say, well, this is what we saw. I think it's important to think about that as well. So this is a three-part question. For athletes moving on to the collegiate level of play, what safety precautions are collegiate athletic departments taking? And what about the general student population? And also, what advice or safety precautions should parents be sharing with their athletes? Murphy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, at the collegiate level, some of the biggest precautions that institutions are taking, I would say one of the larger ones is the mitigation and minimizing the risk of spread. I believe we all understand that COVID is going to happen. The world has not been able to prevent that. But for these institutions, having these things in place are very key, such as putting testing protocols in place, different protocols regarding social distancing around your campus, in your facilities, the cleaning and disinfecting of the facilities, mask wearing, when you are walking about campus, when you're in your lift groups, when you're outside, small group training are very key. Quarantining protocols, are you quarantining your students or your student athletes before they arrive? When they do arrive, are you putting them in isolation? What are your protocols there? Developing a lot of protocols with campus itself, athletic trainers and sports medicine physicians. Are you speaking with student health? Are you working with the university personnel? Because they're students, so you're not only dealing with the athlete part of it, you're dealing with the student part. How can we work together to mitigate this risk? And then it's treating the confirmed positives. That is another big thing that you have to look at, not only minimizing the risk of spread, but once someone does have a confirmed COVID-19 test, what is your plan? How are you going to isolate them? Where are you going to isolate them? What is your return to play protocol? Are you, you should be seeing a physician to return to any type of activity. Biomarker tests, some say EKGs, echocardiograms. All these precautions have to be looked at, definitely talked about and put in play when it comes to this level of athletics and a lot of levels of athletics.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Chu, care to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And mitigating, I guess going back to kind of youth sport versus what we're seeing at the collegiate level. At the collegiate level, a lot of, when we talk about community spread, our college athletes are college students. And so there's a lot of things that are associated with being a college student that aren't really the social distancing and the mitigating spread kind of activities that some of our youth might be doing just by sheer fact that they're at home with their families. And so education and educating our athletes and just teaching them about, as Murphy was saying, masking and social distancing and kind of adhering to some of these rules, because all of the conferences have put together all of these very, very detailed plans on lift groups and small group workouts and distancing when we're in weight rooms, working out outside when we can. Some campuses have moved complete weight rooms outside so that there's not that circulation of air inside. But it all kind of, so to speak, goes out the door when we can't control them when they're off of our athletic facilities and they're doing things outside. And so I think that that's part of the issue. And I know college campuses are gearing up, if they haven't already, to start welcoming students back onto campus. And so there's a lot of distancing involved and a lot of planning. And I know that our athletic department, because we've had athletes that have been on campus since June, we're helping our student body population integrate themselves back on campuses because we've done a lot of the testing and we've integrated them. And so I think, all of these things, it's going to look different than it has before, but there are safety precautions that all universities have put together to keep our student athletes and our students safe.
Absolutely. And we must be compliant. If we're not compliant, none of it works. So as a parent, I share with my child the same thing. If we're non-compliant, then none of what we're saying is going to work. So you go into school, you're going to be sent home because we're not being compliant. So if we don't work together to make this work, then it's not going to. So, and leading by example as well, I also think is important as a parent when it comes to our athletes. So if a child has had colleges contacting him or her about playing at the next level, but now colleges are unable to have camps or college visits, should families be concerned about receiving offers? We had a question, should they reclass their athlete and have him or her graduate in 2022? And then the follow-up to that would be, are colleges adjusting their recruitment strategies due to COVID-19? Dr. Chu?
Yeah, I know the NCAA, when COVID kind of hit our country pretty hard back in March, there's a lot of recruiting that occurs back in the spring, all summer. And they immediately realized, people couldn't travel across the country and visit families, and a lot of things couldn't happen. And then when summer came around and camps got canceled, that was another opportunity to kind of showcase your athlete. And so the NCAA has put forth kind of some new rules around it. And a lot of it is kind of new rules that we've done in our workplace. There's a lot of more video conferencing. There's a lot more Zoom calls. There's a lot of face-to-face that's not in person. And I know some of those restrictions and regulations have been loosened a little bit. I know that, our coaches on our campuses, they're still recruiting, and they're recruiting amongst the constraints that the NCAA have given them, because they've asked over and over again, they've asked our administration and compliance, what are they allowed to do? And they're out there doing it because we still need to field teams. Like, we're still going to have athletics. And so it just is going to look, as with a lot of things right now, a little different. A lot of video, compiled videos of play from and watching video versus being live. And then some of the telephone calls and then home visits have turned into video calls instead. And so I think, there's a lot of restrictions to travel. And so we understand that they can't get on campus, but I know there's a lot of recruitment changes, and, people are putting videos on a lot of social media so that, athletes and parents can see facilities and things of that nature. So recruiting is still happening. So it is just happening in a different way.
And Murphy, what do you see as well? So,
yeah, I agree 100%. I believe everyone's being very creative from a recruiting standpoint, but I know you asked the question about reclassifying, and I believe that's a family decision that needs to be made as a family and with your son or daughter to reclassify. From a recruiting standpoint, these college coaches and these college programs, they know when they have a senior graduating, or if they and spots that they have. There's a chance that there may be something for you this year, but if you reclassify, there may not be anyone that is graduating or leaving the following year. College recruiting goes 2 or 3 years deep, and there's a lot of individuals that they're looking at, because that you may not get that individual that you're recruiting extremely hard. Again, I think that's a decision that the family needs to make with regards to reclassifying, but everyone's in the same boat. There aren't any camps going on. There aren't any official visits going on because of travel. So everyone is really around the country is in the same boat from a recruiting standpoint, and being able to see the campuses and speak to the coaches.
Exactly. Now, if a child's season was postponed, and he doesn't want to train. What can we do to make sure he's ready once he can compete again? Dr. Watson?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question and kind of gets to the heart of what it's like to be a parent of a young athlete during COVID-19. I mean, I think we have to be cognizant of the really potentially big psychological impacts that losing physical activity, losing the connections to sport, losing competition have for athletes. And I think adolescents may be among the most vulnerable for this. So on some level, I worry most that there are going to be athletes that don't actually return at all. I mean, I think the amount of uncertainty that we're all facing with if and when and how sports resume make it very hard to contextualize what to do for a young athlete who wants to continue to develop and move forward. So I think first things first, what I would do is with a young athlete, try and help convey to them that losing motivation within this context or feeling estranged from your sport or disconnected or frustrated or nervous is totally normal and reasonable. I mean, I think we have to do away with the idea that, you know, they just have to sort of bear down and struggle through it. I think it's okay to recognize that this is really a big deal for a lot of young athletes that lose their opportunity to participate in sports and help them kind of set that initial context. I think it does present kind of a unique opportunity in many ways to help young athletes reconnect with why they love the sport that they do and perhaps frame what they do going forward during this period of restriction around that. Reconnect to how much they love learning skills and developing new abilities within their sport, what it feels like to get fitter and get stronger when you train, the sort of developmental things that you don't need a timeline necessarily for, and you don't need a measuring stick against anyone else. You can really sort of reconnect the things that you love about the sport that you're doing. And then as parents, figuring out ways to help them kind of facilitate that process. Maybe that means reaching out to coaches, reaching out to teammates, and doing things virtually. My kids have been in Zoom trainings for months, and they were an okay surrogate. It's nice to be back on some level on the field, but they were a unique way to connect with their teammates and their coaches that kept them going. And I think as parents, we have sort of a unique opportunity to get involved in their sports in a way that maybe we don't. A lot of the time, we're just dropping them off or yelling from the sidelines, but here maybe is an opportunity to help them direct what they want to do within their sport, and we facilitate it. If I have a kid who simply wants to work on finishing a soccer ball, maybe I go out and serve it for them, right? They just need a training partner, but they can drive it and I can help play a part in it. And maybe we kind of reconnect with some of that internal motivation going forward that helps them see through this period of restriction.
Excellent, excellent point. Now, on the flip side of that, what if you have a child that's eager to maintain a competitive edge? What should my player be doing during this time? Should they be playing sports? Should they sit out and condition on their own? Murphy?
I think if you want to keep that competitive edge, you have to look at the other aspects of being an athlete, the mental aspects of sport. Sport takes a lot out of you, and you have this ability and this opportunity right now to be able to address all those things. Speaking with your coaches about what improvements need to be done. How can I continue to get better? That with some of our sports, what type of relationship do the athletes have with their coaches? People who get into coaching, they care about the success of the student or the athlete and want them to do well. And they're very encouraging and should be honest about the improvements that these individuals need to make. Watching film, I was a former collegiate student athlete, have two boys that are athletes as well. Do you truly know how to watch film? I think those opportunities continue to help you get that competitive edge. You're not just watching to watch, you're watching to find tendencies. You're watching to figure out how to get that competitive edge and not to just say, okay, on third down, they're going to do this. You want to critically look at it. And for those high school students that will soon be collegiate student athletes, they're going to force you to watch film. And here are your opportunities to speak with your coaches about gaining that competitive edge. And with regards to, conditioning on their own, I think if you choose to condition on your own, you have to make it purposeful. I think that is going to be very key. We've seen that in some of our student athletes. They work out on their own and they do really, really well. But there's a difference between your own and running and working out with someone running next to you, or working out when you're being coached. There's this level of anxiety that tends to peak a little bit when the coaches they're yelling at you to finish through the line versus when you're out on your run and you're doing things on your own. So things like that, if you're going to go out and do it on your own, you have to make it purposeful. You have to make it to a point that you are getting better at something every single day.
Very true. I know at least in our town, and I think most across the country, they took the hoops down. So there were no hoops in the park. So they couldn't play in the park. So you had to have a hoop in your yard or
Right.
have you. I think that was across the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another challenge that athletes and parents are facing is schedule changes. What if a child is now facing overlapping schedule of sports in the spring? How can they stay active in the fall, and how do they not overdo it in the spring, Dr. Chu?
I mean, I think this is what on the NCAA committees that I'm working with, we're kind of working through some of this now, because we have some conferences that have canceled their fall sports, and the hope is to try to play some of those sports in the spring. And so then and I can see how when youth sports, a lot of youth sport athletes are multi-sport athletes. And so now we have overlapping, and the one thing we want to prevent is overuse injuries. And so kind of maintaining is always important, as Murphy said, maintaining and being creative in how we work out and how we're working out on our own and how we're conditioning, but not overdoing, because once that spring season comes around, and if we're trying to manage two sports, we don't want to get an overuse injury. And I've had, some athletes that might play, say, soccer and run cross country. And so in soccer practices, you're working out and running quite a bit. And so some of the practices for cross country and the volume of running for cross country might not be as necessary because of all the volume that you're doing in the running when you're playing soccer. So kind of looking at all of the facets of the various sports that you're playing and what you're going to need to be doing in that spring season, if we're doing two sports, and kind of just preventing injury is very important. And as a parent, I think you need to kind of maintain that and kind of look at that from an outskirts and kind of navigate with your child how you want to look, how you want spring to look.
Good point. What do you weigh in on that, Dr. Watson?
Yeah, and I think all of that is 100% correct, and I totally agree. The addition I might make is that on the flip side of it, there's also a real risk of returning to activity too fast and potentially engaging in things when we're not fit enough and we're a little more vulnerable to injury because we've been less active. I think as we see with younger athletes, there's a real issue with levels of physical inactivity during these times of restriction. And then when they sort of suddenly have the opportunity to get back in sports, and we're all so excited to get out, we want to run a very real risk of kind of doing too much all of a sudden, and they don't have the sort of fitness adaptations and strength they might normally have at this time of the year to tolerate bigger training loads. And as a consequence, we see an increased risk of injury. So I think it's always about maintaining that balance and being wary that when we are going to return, we have to be gradual about it, and we have to be careful that we don't just, out of love of being able to be back on the field, we don't do too much too soon and put people at risk.
Murph?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the injury piece was very key. That was a lot of things that we discussed with our student athletes returning. With the inactivity, yes, there was activity, but the intensity of the inactivity, we were really concerned about, heat-related illness, the exertional sickling, those things, once they returned back to sport, so we we looked at that all the time, and it was a big, huge topic of conversation amongst all of our peers around the country as their return to high level and high intense activity.
Take it slow.
Right.
My child's on a high school sports team that's currently able to condition only. A few of her teammates are in travel leagues, playing the sport and still coming to practice. She and her other teammates are frustrated that these kids may get COVID and shut the training down. What should we do to address our concerns? Dr. Chu?
I think there should be some mitigating factors to training. So to make sure that the training that they're doing at the high school level, if it's just training, then as Murphy had talked about before, we can social distance, we can mitigate some of the risks when it's training. And so the risk is lower. So if you're masking and you're within 6 feet or you're doing it all outside, there's some risk mitigation. I would probably, as with everything these days, voice my concerns as a parent and find out what, what the coaches and what the institutions are or the schools are doing to mitigate that risk so that your child is safer. And I think that the more knowledge that you can gain on if they've even thought of it, because what if they haven't even thought of that and it hasn't been brought to their attention? You are bringing it to their attention that these other students could be bringing it in, and then they can look at it in a whole new way. And I think that that is, asking all of those tough questions right now is appropriate.
Dr. Watson?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of that. I mean, there's the context within which our kids are playing specific sports is going to differ from one to the next, and the degree that we can mitigate risk is going to vary from one to the next. But this is the hardest part about being a parent, right? I mean, my daughter goes to soccer, and I don't know what any of her teammates have been doing all day, right? I mean, they could have been playing softball earlier or yesterday or hockey or something else. I really don't know what they've been doing all day. So what we do is institute risk mitigation practices within her training that we think reduce the risk of transmission between all of them. On some level, I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to control what the other kids that show up there do, but while they're there, we can take steps to reduce the risk as much as we can and hope that that's enough to keep everybody safe.
And now what if one of the children do have, or one of the athletes do end up with COVID? Should the entire team be notified? And then, what do you feel about that?
Sorry, go ahead.
True. That's good.
I mean, for us, so I've spent a fair amount of time trying to put together procedures for youth soccer specifically. So I can really only speak to that as directly maybe as others. But I think really if you do end up with a positive case, regardless of what sport it's in, you certainly should be contacting the individuals that they were training with or around, and we should be doing contact tracing retrospectively to try and identify anyone that they may have been exposed to. But whether or not their interaction with their teammates constitutes a true exposure, I think depends on the activity. I mean, you can imagine coming to an activity where they're physically distanced the whole time, they're all of their off the field talks and huddles or everything are physically distanced. There may be masks worn through the parts where they're feasible. Things are being disinfected. There's symptom monitoring before they get there. And in that scenario, you may not have anyone who's been exposed to that child that was present at a training if they're ultimately positive. I think it's just going to depend on the specific sport context for whether or not you need to qualify someone as being exposed and then quarantine them afterwards.
What are your thoughts, Murphy?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's right to inform the rest of the team and other adults that there was confirmed COVID positive. Again, you're unsure, and maybe you are sure of where these other individuals are going back to. They could have someone in their home that is predisposed to many other type of ailments. You want to make sure that everyone is protected. And the best way to protect is to be honest And I think that's very key with everything moving forward. Be upfront and be honest. I mean, there's still so many unknowns, but as long as we are honest about what's going on, that helps your teammates, and that's your team, so you want to protect each other. You want to play for one another. And if you inform them and are honest with them, then you're a team for sure.
Agreed. Dr. Chu, care to weigh in on that as well?
I agree with everything that everyone's been saying. I mean, I think that it is right now, with the spread that we see in the community, any way that we can mitigate it just helps. And so it is appropriate to notify if someone is positive, and then kind of determine, like Dr. Watson said, if there were close contact during that practice and that training session, then those certain athletes should be heightened and aware, and possibly tested. And then, if there wasn't, then there might not have been, high risk exposure, and they can kind of just symptom monitor and see how they do afterwards. But I think that, with what we're seeing, I think notifying is definitely important, and contact tracing is important.
Exactly. I read on social media recently that a survey out of Wisconsin indicated that 2/3 of high school students had indicated that they were feeling depressed from not playing sports. My child's high school season was postponed until spring of 2021, and I worry that she'll fall into a depression. What can I do? And as medical experts, what's your advice for parents and athletes to address fear, disappointment, and uncertainty of sports being canceled for my athlete, and the disappointment that I feel as a parent with this going on?
I could start with that. I think as a parent, and if this happened to your son or daughter, I think it's important to speak with them about the sport, about what they missed most or what they will miss most about it. The key is communication here. How they thought the upcoming season was going to be, with the how the spring went and everything was completely shut down. Ask them, did they truly feel prepared for the upcoming season? Really engage them on the sport itself, and then how they're feeling about the sport. If they need to speak with someone, I would encourage that as well. But, from a depression standpoint, I think it's important to recognize those signs as well. If you feel that your son or daughter is falling into some type of depression, are they feeling withdrawn? Are there some sleep issues? Are there some appetite things going on? But look into them and have those conversations with them. I think this pandemic, the loss of sport, the bringing back of sport, is a good way to open up a different level of communication with your son or daughter, especially about the sport. Engage them in other ways that aren't physical. And I know I mentioned that before. There's many different aspects of sport besides just the physical aspect. And if you want to keep them engaged and help them prepare for that spring season, here's that opportunity. But again, you may need some help, and that help may come from another mental well-being, mental health professional as well, to help your son or daughter.
Good point. Dr. Watson, care to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate what a potentially enormous physical and emotional impact that school and sports cancellations can have on young athletes. I've been part of this study at Wisconsin that's been getting this attention, and really I often just serve as a mouthpiece for a really terrific sports medicine researcher who's been spearheading this. Dr. Tim McGuine had the foresight this May to quickly pull together a survey that he distributed nationwide to look at physical activity and mental health in our adolescent athletes during a lot of the school and sport cancellations. And so we were able to take about 3,000 athletes from that survey and compare it back to some prior research of Wisconsin athletes, of which we had about 5,000, to look at the changes in physical activity. And and mental health. And what we found was that the physical activity levels had dropped by 50%. Now we have enough problems with physical inactivity before COVID. When it drops in half, I mean, that's a really big deal. It obviously has physical benefit or health issues, but it also has tremendous mental health impacts as well. So when we looked at before COVID, less than 10% of our high school athletes reported moderate to severe depression. And this May, in the wake of the school and sport cancellations, it more than tripled to over 33%. We also had 25% reporting moderate to severe anxiety. So of our adolescent athletes, we've got 1 in 3 reporting the sort of depression and 1 in 4 reporting the sort of anxiety that would prompt you to refer them on for evaluation and treatment for these mental health issues. We don't have a nationwide sample to compare the data to before COVID-19, but of the 13,000 young athletes that we were able to survey in May, we found that they had even higher levels of depression and anxiety than what we found in Wisconsin. And girls in particular, nearly half were reporting moderate to severe anxiety and moderate to severe depression. More recently, we've kind of been teasing out some of this nationwide data. And unfortunately, as we've seen in many areas, COVID-19 really has disproportionately impacted low-income communities. And this appears to be similar for our young athletes. We found that those athletes that came from the areas of the country with the highest levels of poverty also reported the lowest levels of physical activity and the highest levels of anxiety and depression. And before COVID-19, I mean, we had really sort of frightening increases in adolescent suicide and substance abuse. And to look at these mental health impacts just in the short term after school and sport cancellations, I think really needs to be taken into account. I mean, COVID-19, of course, is dangerous. I would never be dismissive of the fact that it is widespread and dangerous. But I hope that we can at least incorporate some of this information about the potential ramifications of isolating kids from school and from their sports, because that appears to have real risks associated with it as well. So I think my advice to anyone, if you have any concern about this, or even if you don't, just have a conversation with your child about it. I think Murphy is exactly right. This is just about communication. A lot of the time, young athletes aren't going to offer this up unless we ask. They live in a culture where they're expected to, be gritty and fight through problems on their own. And they may not be quick to bring up how they're feeling, and that may compound the problem. I think we offer to them that it's okay and normal to feel upset about what's going on, but to start a conversation so that if we do have concerns that they're starting to show symptoms of depression or anxiety, that we're very quick to act on it and connect them with their healthcare provider.
Excellent points. This is a very serious issue. Dr. Chu, care to weigh in on that as well?
I would echo speaking to your children about it. I know the mental health providers that I work with, both on the NCAA level and at the collegiate level, we talk a lot about surveys. So you can send out surveys and you can kind of assume what people are thinking. But when there's been studies that have shown if you have someone fill out a piece of paper on how they feel, they might answer everything's okay. Versus if you ask them the same exact questions, they might voice different opinions, and you might find out information that you didn't know and that is important in their care. And I think, asking those questions, every athlete that has come back on my campus and freshman athletes that have left home for the first time, I ask them when they come in, how do you feel about playing? Are there any concerns? Because you're playing amongst COVID and we don't really know right now what the future holds and what the future looks like. And having those conversations with those athletes was interesting. And I learned a lot, and we were able to talk through some stuff. And if they needed to, we had mental health providers ready to talk to them about some of their concerns. And so I think that just having those conversations with your kids is extremely important. And this is a very important matter that we're all going to be dealing with on a number of different levels in the coming months.
Very true. Murphy, care to comment on that as well?
No, I mean, I shared my thoughts on it with regards to just have an opportunity to speak with them and understand where they're coming from. We support our children and we want the best for them. So having that opportunity to truly communicate about what's going on with them, I think is key.
Excellent. And I think also as we're so invested in our child athlete as well, and it's also being honest with them about how we feel about what's happening with the season being canceled and so forth, I think is also important, equally important. You know, we're running around with kids every night to practice or something else, and that's been removed from our life as well. So there's a lot of time, a lot of extra time. So absolutely spectacular. It's been very informative for me as a parent. I hope it's been informative to the other parents in the audience as well. We received some amazing questions from our audience and we'll answer as many as we can get to. So first one we have up for anyone that wants to jump in. If a child wants to play at the collegiate level, will he or she be behind from a training or skills perspective if they don't play at all this season?
I don't believe so. You know, I think everyone is in the same boat. You know, it's not like that someone's still playing as a team and they're playing games or whatnot. Sport is, you know, pretty much been shut down for a lot of people around the country. But again, looking at your skill level, having those conversations with your coach about the things that they can improve on individually, I think is key. You know, I mean, the coach is looking at you and encouraging you every single day, but they have the key for you. You know, if you need to work on your backpedaling, you ask them, what are these things do I need to improve on to play, to get on the field? And those good coaches will give you those that recipe for you to be better. So again, just communication. Like I said, make that training on your own purposeful. Once you know what it is that you need to improve on, now you take that out to your training sessions.
Very good. What are some other healthy outlets of competition for these elite young athletes? Dr. Chu? Anybody can jump in on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try. I mean, I think we are pretty limited in terms of what we can do with competition for a lot of sports that simply involve players being in close proximity to each other. I mean, a lot of the restrictions that remain in place are really built around physical distancing, and there are some sports that you simply can't play with that in mind. I think maybe what I might do is sort of frame it into how can I continue to develop in a healthy way, or what's a healthy outlet for my continued development within my sport. And I think that sort of reaches back to the discussion earlier about, can I find ways that continue to improve who I am as an athlete that aren't built around anybody else? They're really built around my own development, my own kind of technique development, my own fitness development. I think one of the, I'm always sort of a proponent of doing things outside, and if there is a silver lining to COVID-19, it's that being outside seems to be relatively protective of a lot of the virus transmission. So take the opportunity to get out. Maybe try cross-training in a way you haven't before. Get out on a bike, get out on a trail, do something that maybe rounds out your fitness level that may not be directly aligned with what you think makes you a better athlete within, say, soccer, but probably does benefit you in the long run in terms of your fitness and your durability and your ability to return to your sport a safe way when you can.
Do you think elite athletes should get additional cardiovascular screening due to COVID? And if so, how often and to what extent? Dr. Chu?
So I think that there's a lot of unknowns with myocarditis, which is what is the concern with COVID-19. I don't know that, there are a lot of different groups and a lot of different recommendations throughout the country on getting cardiac screening. And I think there is still a lot to be said for history taking. So asking about family history and asking about cardiac history and, getting that baseline EKG can be helpful in cases. I don't think that, getting one every year in youth athletes is something that is necessary, to be honest. I know at the collegiate level, a lot of people are doing baseline EKGs because if you get one, it's better if you have something to compare it to. So that's where, getting one and then to have a comparison if something were to happen makes that one a little bit more important. In terms of echocardiograms and those natures, a lot of it is just due to it. Right now we're saying symptomatic cases as well as other, moderate symptoms. There are some recommendations out there that you do get echocardiograms, but I don't know that it's going to help, screening on a regular basis. And I don't know that doing anything different than what we were doing prior to COVID in terms of screening and prevention is any different. I think that if you do contract COVID or the virus and you are fairly moderately to severely symptomatic, there is some recommendations out there that say you do need to have advanced cardiac screening.
Thanks for that. So coming up to the last question. I'm sorry that we were unable to get to every parent question. I think we had some 500 parents in the audience, and we only have an hour to get to so many. So if there are any questions you have, you can always email them to us, and we'll get them answered for you. Last question. I'm a youth sports director with USAF. How can I help my parents and youth be ready for these challenges? Murphy?
Again, I think just thinking about how to mitigate the risk of spread, be honest with them about sport, your expectations. Again, if you are building your team, it's about the team. It's about one individual protecting the next when it comes to COVID-19 and the coronavirus. But again, encouraging them, once it's an opportunity to play sport, encourage them, build them up, because these coaches, I'm sure you're just as excited to see them as they are to see you. But again, reassure them that you want to make it safe. You don't know what's coming tomorrow with this. Things are changing often, so they have to be very fluid. But I think that for both parties, the coach and the players, it will bring some happiness to them once they have that ability to start playing the sports that they love again.
Very true. Very true. So that's all the time we have for today. A reminder to our audience, all 3 of our sessions have been recorded and will be available online shortly. You'll receive an email with more information once they are online. Feel free to share any insights you've gained from our discussion on social media using the hashtag #PlayInformed. If you have any questions, please email marketing@nata.org. Again, that's marketing@nata.org. I personally want to thank all our panelists, shared such great information. I've learned a lot as a parent, and I hope the audience did as well. Thank you so much.